As I stood facing east, there was white lightning in blue everywhere. As I faced the mirror, there was a red layer, quite a bit pink, but overall red layer between me and the mirror. When it came back, it moved wavily, a little bit towards the mirror, a little bit away from the mirror. I began to sense a presence on the upper right side of the mirror. It became a thick blackness coming forth from the mirror, much like one sees with a pile of fire. Shudders came over me. The thickness was not just a layer, but more or less filled the room. It approached me until down me the euphoric shudders were complete. And in the meantime, I was buzzy, unusually content and stilled. The mirror of Floron gives us an example of how structure and method can bring forth experience, particularly if there is an extended buildup to the main ritual. We see two variations of the form of the mirror. What its 11 names and 10 symbols mean or represent particularly, I don't know, and we're not seeing much in the way of reference. We do see something in the way of warning that basically it was one of those warnings that, oh, well, it's better to be Christian and, these things might deceive you. I presume they mean to use an operator that is a pre-adolescent, or at least a teenager that has not lost their virginity, and I don't mean the technical virgin stuff either. The invocation is strange. It might be arranged in such a way that a person's like, oh, it starts with the Bismillah, so therefore, so when they don't understand the rest, they just presume they're doing something in the name of God. Frater Solomon and Sithmeth are herein honored, like the type of operations that are typical for this book. The spirit is directed and questioned and all that, and then left to depart in an honorable and respectable way. And the original text just said there should be one. So in this book, there is an example of one. Platonic and Pythagorean thought is certainly useful to the magician, whether this is the Kabbalistic magician or not. But we see some origins of stuff implied before you see references to it. On some level, maybe not conscious, but on some level, the Gnostics understood the use of scrying, how it produced alter personalities, and it referenced it to creation. The idea that the shirk type of magic, the seher type of magic, was really Solomonic or Mosaic or whatever. That's more from the Jewish side. I would definitely agree with that, because as much as the Arabs weren't all Muslim and they definitely had stuff from before, a lot of that stuff either just faded away or wasn't really there to begin with, because we know that from even pre-Christian times there was some language games played with the religious tradition. They tried to make their Cohens and their rabbis sound better than the prophets in some ways. There's talk in this book here about not trusting a magician with their personally revealed system. And it's like, well, there's a difference between, the Descartesian separation of the mind and body, and realizing that your own psychological worlds are your own psychological worlds and aren't necessarily upon any other. But it's even putting it in that category, there can be something spiritual besides that. And this book here does talk about how there's a real reality to some of these beings. Obviously, not everything that is said about them would be according as is said, right? But certainly, just like the hypnosis thing, there's a combination of working things in you and around you, and then the subject that is to be hypnotized, well, something has to happen with them. So mesmerism and hypnotism and all that stuff, it sort of just combines. And when you learn projection and evocation and invocation, whether this is externalized or internalized projection, one can certainly operate in worlds of myth, whether they are not true. Whether or not they are true. There is some truth that some scholars would have considered Aleister Crowley differently had he been a Jew. But the point is that terms were used for their shock value more than their literal reference before him. The same terms even. And the Kabbalistic use of some of the Greek and stuff like this as like a side reference that was never intended, or you could reasonably say it would have been never intended in the original. A lot of this stuff in reference to the Bible and stuff like this that people say, oh, it's all flowery and it's in code and stuff like this, and it's like, you can't really make the point that that was the case. They thought they were representing the science and stuff of their time, and so the science and religion of their time was saying this, but the tradition wasn't pure, you could say, and they were getting it from different sources, and they thought they were representing what was totally the truth. I mean, they might have literally thought that. Certainly, some groups that have passed it on have thought that. Some things are real on different levels, and that can include objective levels, but let us also remember that stuff like this is a system of development, and other systems that can be compared to it can be thought of in a way of, there's a difference between something being a side effect and it being the main goal that you're working towards. And that's sort of the difference between particularly this take on Solomonic magic and a lot of things, because you're not just trying to make something out of the smoke or the whatever. You're trying to bring this experience that you're connecting to in the mirror, or there's some crystal or something. One of the things that we're trying to do with these objects and procedures is like dreaming while you're awake. Now, retreats where you sleep in a place of worship and you only engage in the spiritual thing there. I mean, you leave to use the restroom and you wash up and you come back, and it's only a place for non-secular behavior. And perhaps there's certain practices that could be employed. I myself can go over certain traditions, and these traditions of revealed and inspired phrases have kept me from having any of what would typically be called a nightmare for, most of my life. And I don't mean most of my life in terms of days or, because that was certainly the case before that. But I mean most of my life as in over 20 years. We got to be careful about guided meditations. It's like, well, what could be in the guided meditation that's being slipped in, right? But otherwise, the guided meditations that do too much and don't leave much for your mind and all that sort of stuff, I try to share my visions for people to use, and they can use them in that way. And some people's like, why aren't they, chapters and chapters, this hour-long thing that you're writing? And it's like, well, I just don't have detail for that. And I don't want to draw things out tediously either. And when people do that with their guided meditations and their sharing of accounts and stuff like this, it seems artificial so much of the time that it's like they are making up details, and it's like, okay, you have an imagination, but it's not the same thing as making things up. You know what I mean? But it can kind of stifle things to put too much thing on it. Just like it was talking about the structure of thought, aiding in the developing of thought rather than just wandering aimlessly and saying, oh, well, that's free thought. If we develop our focus, if we combine psychology and philosophy and a sense of spirituality, that's full of meaning and purpose, then these things are fulfilling in themselves. Regardless of any strange things that happen, but perhaps when you work on this, then they happen even more.